He promised he'd come back the next morning to help me finish packing. That was 2 years ago. Now I sit in the same living room, alone, surrounded by cardboard boxes that haven't moved since. I kept one chair. Not because it was valuable, but because it didn't squeak when I sat down. That's something you begin to care about when you live alone, and the only noise in the room is your own breathing. The rest of the furniture, the walnut dining table James bought when we were still young and foolish, the velvet couch that had survived 2 grandbabies and 3 dogs, was either sold or donated the day after the house changed hands. I stayed behind to finish the rest. Or so I told myself. At 74, you stop rushing. People your age die doing that. But there was another reason I never hurried. A part of me hoped that maybe, Trevor would walk through that door again, just like he did that Wednesday afternoon, holding his phone in one hand and a bottle of antacids in the other, saying, "Mom, I need your help. It's bad." He didn't cry. Trevor never cries. But I'd seen him once, when he was 11 and broke his wrist falling off his bike. That same tightness was in his face. He paced my kitchen like a cornered animal, explaining terms I didn't understand. Market corrections, interest rates, predatory loans. What I heard was simpler. He was drowning, and I was his lifeline. I remember how he paused when I said I'd think about it. He looked at me, puzzled, as if it had never occurred to him that I could hesitate. That maybe I had a life too. But then he softened, smiled that boyish smile he always used on teachers and girlfriends and, more often than not, on me. "You're the only person I trust, Mom." I called the real estate agent the next morning. This house, this warm, sun-baked patch of Arizona where James and I spent 42 years, was gone within 6 weeks. The buyers wanted it fast, in cash, and didn't care about the wallpaper or the creaking pipes or the decades of memories sunk into the wood. I sold it for less than it was worth, because Trevor said time was more important than money. When the check cleared, I gave him everything. Everything. He said he just needed a boost, just one last push to get the company back on track. "A few months and we're golden," he said. "I'll pay you back tenfold." I even gave him my car. It was a modest sedan, but reliable. I figured he'd need it more than me. For meetings, for errands, for rebuilding whatever had broken in his life. Besides, I could always walk to the grocery store. I used to do it when I was younger. I didn't tell anyone about the money, not the neighbors, not my church friends, not even Lucy, my oldest friend from high school who calls every Tuesday. I knew what they'd say. Knew they'd ask me why I didn't just say no. But how do you say no to your child when he says he's falling apart? After Trevor left, I moved into a small rental on the edge of town. 1 bedroom, a kitchenette. No porch, no garden, no memories. The boxes came with me, but I couldn't bring myself to open them. They held things that no longer had a place. Photo albums, James's tools, an Afghan knitted by my mother before her hands gave out. All of it felt too heavy now, too loud in a space that wasn't really mine. I waited for Trevor to call. At first, I made excuses for him. He must be busy. He must be working day and night to get back on his feet. Then I started imagining accidents. What if something had happened to him? What if the stress had gotten to him? I tried calling, once. It rang 3 times, then went to voicemail. I never tried again. Instead, I waited. I made tea each morning, just 1 cup. I listened to the radio. I watched the trees outside turn from green to gold and then to bare. I lit candles for Thanksgiving and cooked for one. On Christmas, I put up a paper wreath I found at the dollar store. And through it all, I kept thinking, he'll come. Any day now. He'll come and we'll open these boxes together and maybe laugh. But he didn't come. The landlord raised the rent last month. I don't know how long I can stay here. My knees hurt in the mornings and I've had to give up driving altogether. Sometimes I wonder where Trevor is now. If he's happy. If he remembers me. If he thinks of that smile he gave me when I handed him the check. That wide, relieved smile, like someone stepping off a sinking boat and onto dry land. That smile is all I have left of him. And these boxes. Trevor used to talk about loyalty like it was currency. In business, Mom, loyalty is everything, he once told me, leaning back in my kitchen chair, arms folded behind his head, like he had it all figured out. Maybe that's why I believed he wouldn't betray mine. He came to me with his voice low and his hands trembling. Not from shame, no. From stress. From overwork. From too many sleepless nights spent watching his company unravel. It's the vendors, he said. They're pulling out. And the bank's breathing down my neck. I have 3 weeks before I lose everything. I had never seen him like that. Even when James died, and Trevor spoke at the funeral, he was composed, even noble. But that day, in my kitchen, the boy I'd raised was gone. In his place sat a man in pieces. He pulled out a folder from his leather satchel, thick with spreadsheets and projections and colorful tabs. Look, he said, flipping through them. The numbers work. I just need time. A few more months. I've already cut staff, reduced inventory. I've done everything I can. I just need capital, just for the bridge. I nodded, pretending I understood. Truth was, I couldn't follow half of what he said, but the desperation, that I recognized. That I'd lived through when James had been laid off in 1987, when we'd sold our wedding rings to cover the mortgage. Desperation doesn't change over time. It just wears new clothes. Trevor leaned forward. I know you've got equity in the house. I wouldn't ask if it weren't serious. You'd be saving me, Mom. You'd be giving me a second chance. I didn't answer right away. He stared at me. That unblinking look he got when he was 5 and wanted another cookie, or 15 and wanted the car keys. It always meant he was waiting for me to say yes. I asked him how much he needed. He named a number. I didn't flinch, but inside, something in me dropped. I had saved all my life. James and I had never lived large, never took big vacations, never bought on credit. That number would take almost all of it. Still, I nodded. You'll get it back, he said. You'll see. With interest. I'll make sure you're set for life. I remember that line exactly. Set for life. As if I wasn't already set. I didn't need yachts or beach houses. I needed peace. I needed my son. Within a week, I'd signed the house over to a young couple with a newborn. They seemed kind. I even baked them a pie on their first weekend there and left it on the porch with a note. Take care of her. She held a family once. I moved in with my friend Carol for a month while looking for a place of my own. Carol and I had been friends since our 20s, before husbands and babies and everything that followed. She didn't ask many questions, but I could tell she was worried. You sure about this, Annie? She said over tea. Giving up your home like that? It's not giving up, I told her. It's helping. There's a difference. But I knew the truth. It was giving up. I gave up safety. I gave up routine. I gave up the back porch where James used to drink his coffee and the sunroom where I read books on Sunday afternoons. I gave up the creaky floorboard in the hallway, the kitchen drawer that always stuck, the hummingbird feeder James hung just outside the window. And I gave up the car, my little blue Honda with the scratch on the passenger side from the time Trevor borrowed it and parked too close to a pole. He needed something to get around, he said. Just temporary, he promised. Soon I'll get a company vehicle. That was the last I saw of the Honda, or the money. He hugged me tight the day he left with it, said, "You're a lifesaver, Mom. Seriously. I owe you big time." I stood at the curb and watched him drive away. I remember thinking, he'll be back soon. Just give him time. I went back inside Carol's house and made dinner for both of us. Baked chicken, potatoes, a salad with too much vinegar because I wasn't paying attention. Carol didn't complain. She never did. That night, I sat awake longer than usual. My back ached from the unfamiliar bed. I listened to the creak of the ceiling fan and thought about how quiet the world becomes when you start giving pieces of yourself away. In the morning, I checked my phone. No message. I gave him the benefit of the doubt. He's busy. He's under pressure. He'll call. He didn't. Instead, I started looking for rentals. The real estate agent offered to help, but her idea of affordable didn't match mine. Eventually, I found a listing in a nearby neighborhood, small, quiet, decent enough. I signed the lease on a Tuesday and moved in with the help of Carol's grandson. Trevor never showed up. I texted him the new address. "Let me know when you're free," I added. No reply. A week later, I sent another message. "Hope you're okay. Just checking in." Still nothing. And yet, I kept telling myself stories. His phone broke. He lost my number. He's too proud to say thank you. Anything to avoid the one truth I didn't want to say out loud. That maybe, just maybe, I'd been used. I kept the spare key under the flower pot, just like I used to do at the old house. Even though no one ever came. Some habits outlive the people they were meant for. The new apartment was small, yes, but manageable. A modest one-bedroom with an electric stove that hummed too loudly, a window that didn't quite shut in the corner, and carpets that smelled faintly of bleach. The woman before me had passed away, the landlord said, as if it were a minor detail. I wondered if she'd died alone. I brought only the essentials: a few pans, 2 mugs, the good blanket. The boxes, the ones with James's books, with Trevor's school projects, with my wedding china, stayed stacked in the corner, untouched. Opening them would feel like trying to return to a life that no longer existed. I told myself this was temporary, that once Trevor got back on his feet, I'd buy something nicer. Or maybe he'd offer me a room in his house, somewhere close to his work, close to him. We'd have Sunday dinners again. He'd come by after meetings. Maybe bring someone special to meet me. Those were my thoughts as I rearranged the cabinet shelves and folded dish towels that had no place to go. Weeks passed like falling leaves, one at a time, slow, silent. I didn't hear from him. At first, I waited. I'd leave the porch light on in case he dropped by late. I checked my phone each night before bed. Sometimes I even left the kettle filled with water, ready to be boiled if he happened to stop in. He didn't. I stopped texting after the 3rd message. The last one simply said, "Let me know if you're okay." He didn't. Carol dropped by once a week. She brought lemons from her tree and pretended not to notice how much smaller the new place was. "We should do a movie night soon," she'd say, though we never did. She was kind. But she had her own family, her own routines. I didn't want to intrude. One Thursday morning, I saw a woman walking a toddler down the street. Chubby arms flailing, cheeks red from the breeze. I watched them from the window and wondered if I'd ever see Trevor with a child of his own. Would he teach his son how to ride a bike like James taught him? Would he tell stories about his childhood? Or had he erased all that too? I boiled eggs, even though I didn't want any. You keep feeding yourself, even when no one else thinks you matter. That's what my mother used to say. She was right. A few days later, I ran into Karen from church at the grocery store. She was surprised to see me. "Annie, dear, I heard you moved. But why? You loved that house." I forced a smile. "Oh, just downsizing. Too much space for one person." She touched my arm gently. "I'm sorry. If you ever want to come back to the Tuesday group, we'd love to have you." I said I would. I didn't. That night, I took out one of the boxes, the smallest, and opened it slowly. Inside were James's old ledger books, neatly kept, pages yellowed but organized. He was a quiet man, but meticulous. Each line had meaning. There was a check stub from when Trevor won his first science fair. $50 for materials, it read. James had paid cash. There was also a letter. I had forgotten it existed. "Annie, if you're reading this, then either I'm gone or you're organizing again. Either way, I just want to say thank you. You gave me everything. A home, a son, a quiet kind of happiness most men only dream about. If you ever find yourself alone, remember, I knew your worth even if others forget it. Love, James." I cried quietly, not for Trevor, not for the money, but because someone had once seen me, really seen me. And now they were gone. The next morning, I got a call from the electric company. My auto payment had failed. I hadn't realized my savings had gotten so low. I logged into the bank and stared at the numbers, dwindled, tight. Somehow I'd told myself I was fine, that I had enough, but now I wasn't so sure. Still, I didn't call Trevor. That wasn't the point. If he wanted to help, he'd call me. If he remembered me at all, he'd reach out. But silence is its own kind of answer. The silence had begun to change me. It made me question everything. Had Trevor ever truly seen me? Or had he always seen what I could give? When he was a child, he was bright and full of questions. He used to crawl into bed with James and me during storms, clutching my arm and whispering, "Mom, will the rain flood the roof?" We told him no, not our house, not our strong little house. And he believed us. When he was 15, he once stole a pack of gum and cried for hours after. "I didn't even want it," he'd said. "I just wanted to see if I could get away with it." Now I wondered, had all this been another test? What if I'd said no? Would he still be around? I didn't want to answer that. Not yet. Instead, I looked at my calendar. Thanksgiving was 3 weeks away. The empty boxes still sat in the corner, and the air had grown cooler at night. I thought of making soup, something warm. I opened the fridge and realized I was out of onions. I walked to the store, slow but steady. The cashier, a boy of about 19, smiled politely and asked if I needed help carrying the bag. I said no. I always said no now. There's a kind of silence that doesn't just fill a room. It settles into your bones. It's not the absence of sound, but the absence of expectation. You stop listening for the phone. You stop hoping for a knock on the door. You stop checking the mailbox. By the time Thanksgiving came, I had stopped waiting. I bought a small turkey breast, just enough for one. I made mashed potatoes, opened a can of cranberry sauce, and placed it all carefully on the chipped white plate I'd saved from the old house. It was the last of the good china I hadn't wrapped away. Carol invited me over, of course. She always did. But I told her I wasn't feeling well. It wasn't a lie. Loneliness is an illness too. It aches in your chest and slows your steps. That day, I just didn't want to pretend. I lit a candle at the table and poured a little wine, a toast to nothing, a feast for no one. The next morning, I decided to sell the last thing I hadn't yet, James's toolbox. It wasn't about the money, not entirely. I just wanted space. Space to breathe, to walk through the apartment without bumping into memories. The man who came to pick it up was in his 40s, polite. He said he wanted to teach his son how to fix things. I nodded and said nothing, but when he left, I stood in the doorway and watched his car until it turned the corner. Trevor still hadn't called. I'd stopped telling people about him. At first, I made up stories, that he was traveling, that work was keeping him busy, that we'd spoken just the other day. But eventually, I let the truth sit between me and others like stale air. My son was gone. Not dead, no. Just elsewhere. Wherever else was. One evening, while looking for a coupon in the drawer, I found the spare key to my old car, my blue Honda. I held it in my hand for a long time. The weight of it, the silence of it, the uselessness. I remembered the last drive I ever took, to the notary's office, where I signed over ownership to Trevor. He thanked me with a quick hug and said, "You're the best, Mom. Seriously, I'll make this right." He drove off with the windows down and the music on. I watched the car disappear at the light and told myself, he's starting over. And I helped. But starting over, I've learned, often means leaving something behind, or someone. That night, I couldn't sleep. My legs ached, and my back was tight from sitting too long in the same chair. I reached for the heating pad and caught sight of the bank statement I'd left on the table. The numbers didn't lie. I was running low. I had enough to last maybe 4 more months if I was careful. I could stretch it to 6 if I gave up the groceries with names I recognized. But beyond that, well, I didn't know. There was still some money left in the investment account, the one James set up when we retired. But I'd already dipped into it twice, and accessing it again meant penalties, meant risk, meant more guilt. The guilt wasn't for spending it. It was for admitting that I'd miscalculated everything. I had believed that helping Trevor would buy me back something I'd lost, a relationship, a connection, a seat at the table. But all it bought was distance. Sometimes I imagined writing him a letter, not angry, just honest. I'd tell him how much I missed him, how I hoped he was safe, how I wished I could hear about his life even if I wasn't a part of it anymore. I even wrote it once, folded it neatly, addressed the envelope. But I never mailed it. I didn't know where he lived now. I knew the city. He'd mentioned it once, some booming tech hub where startups rose and fell like dust in the desert wind. But he'd changed numbers, closed his old email, left no trail. He had started over, clean, and I had stayed behind, clinging to what little remained. A paper envelope, a spare key, a chipped white plate. I decided to take a walk. The evening was dry and sharp, the air full of desert cold. The streets were empty, save for a few porch lights and the distant sound of a dog barking. I walked slowly, past trimmed hedges and darkened windows, each one a reminder of lives being lived behind doors I couldn't open. When I got home, the mailbox was full of holiday catalogs and a single envelope from the electric company. Final notice. I placed it on the table, right next to the plate. I stared at the envelope for nearly an hour before opening it. I don't know what I was hoping for. Some clerical error, a misplaced decimal, a different name on the line. But it was mine. My address. My overdue balance. $213.57. That's what stood between me and a dark apartment. It shouldn't have been a crisis. Years ago, it would have been an inconvenience, something I'd mentioned to James over dinner, and we'd laugh about forgetting a bill. But now, it meant the edge. One more month, maybe two, and I'd be out of choices. I stood at the sink, gripping the envelope in one hand and the counter in the other. My knees were stiff. I hadn't eaten all day. For the first time, I allowed myself to say it out loud. He's not coming. The walls didn't answer, of course. They never do. But saying it made something click in me. Not break, not quite, but shift. A quiet settling of facts. He wasn't coming. He wasn't checking in. He wasn't watching the clock, thinking, is Mom okay? Maybe he never had. I pulled out the old red notebook I kept in the kitchen drawer. It had once been for recipes, James's pecan pie, a stew I used to make in the winter, but now it held numbers. My numbers, balances, due dates, the dwindling record of my slow disappearance. I flipped to the back. There, in neat columns, I'd started tracking everything I'd given Trevor over the years. Not just this last time, all of it. The temporary loan for his first apartment after college. The deposit when he started that landscaping business that folded 6 months later. The dental work he couldn't afford when he didn't have insurance. The credit card I opened in my name so he could build credit. The emergency payment after his car was repossessed. The down payment on that house with the big backyard he said was perfect for someday when I have kids. I had written it all down in quiet shame, thinking maybe someday he'd want to know. Maybe he'd be grateful. Maybe he'd say thank you. But gratitude is a strange thing. Some people give it freely. Others treat it like currency, only owed when forced. Trevor never forced it. He smiled. He charmed. He promised. And I kept believing. I made myself a cup of tea. Weak, just a bag waved through water. Sugar was getting low, and I hadn't bought milk in weeks. The next morning I called the electric company. The woman on the line was kind. Her voice had that practiced sympathy, the kind they give to strangers who are about to cry. I can give you a 5-day extension, she said, but after that. I understand, I told her. Thank you. After I hung up, I sat at the table and stared at the space where my dining room used to be, where Trevor once built a science project volcano, where James used to read the Sunday paper, where I had served birthday cakes and casseroles and Thanksgiving turkeys for decades. Now it was just air and a chipped tile and a chair that didn't squeak. That afternoon, I took the bus to the nearest food pantry. I stood in line with a dozen other quiet people, most of them younger than me. No one made eye contact. We all just shuffled forward, waiting for the moment when someone would hand us a bag and a smile and pretend that dignity hadn't been left somewhere at the door. The volunteer who helped me looked no older than 20. She smiled too brightly. "Do you need assistance carrying this?" "No, thank you," I said, holding the bag tight to my chest. Inside were canned beans, a box of pasta, and a jar of something labeled meat product. I didn't look too closely. Hunger makes you flexible. As I walked home, I passed a row of houses with wreaths already hanging in the windows. Christmas was coming. The holiday music had started playing in the stores. The same songs I used to sing with Trevor when he was little. Chestnuts, roasting, silver bells. I'll be home for Christmas. Would he? I stopped in front of a florist shop. A young couple inside were picking out poinsettias, laughing about whether red or white would look better on their mantle. I turned away. I didn't want to see Joy today. That evening, I took out the envelope with the bank's logo. It still held the last statement from my savings account. I did the math, line by line. It was undeniable now. I wouldn't make it past spring. I had sold my house. I had given away my car. I had liquidated everything I could. And I was alone. But here's what I didn't expect. What no one tells you. There is a strange, powerful freedom in reaching bottom. Once there's nothing left to lose, you stop being afraid. That night, I made a decision. Not out of anger, not out of spite, out of clarity. The next day, I opened the yellow pages. Yes, I still had one, and ran my finger down the list until I found the number for a legal clinic. "Hello," I said, when a woman answered. "I need to speak to someone about setting up a financial trust." The receptionist's voice was calm, practiced. "We can schedule you for Thursday at 10 a.m. Does that work for you?" I almost said no. I almost said never mind. But instead, I said, "Yes, that's fine." And just like that, the first brick laid itself in the foundation of my new resolve. The legal clinic wasn't much to look at. A flat beige building with a cracked sidewalk and flickering fluorescent lights. The waiting room smelled faintly of old coffee and printer ink. I sat on a plastic chair with my purse in my lap and the folder I'd prepared held tight in both hands. Inside it were copies of every transaction I'd made for Trevor. Every wire transfer, every signed form, every note I'd written to myself. A record of trust extended, broken, repeated. I wasn't even sure why I brought it. I just didn't want to walk in empty-handed anymore. The attorney was a woman in her 50s, with short gray curls and glasses that kept slipping down her nose. Her name was Angela. She smiled when she shook my hand, but not too wide. Not like she pitied me. "So," she said, settling into her chair, "what kind of trust are you looking to set up?" I hesitated. It felt strange, saying it out loud. It felt like betrayal. But I reminded myself, Trevor had already made his choice. "I want to transfer what's left of my assets into a trust for my granddaughter," I said. "She's only 11, but I want to make sure she has something. I don't want my son to be able to touch any of it." Angela didn't flinch. She just nodded and started typing. "Is your granddaughter your son's daughter?" she asked without looking up. "Yes." "And you're sure you want to exclude your son from this trust?" I swallowed. "I'm sure." She looked at me then, not with judgment, but with a kind of quiet understanding. The kind that only comes from seeing this story play out a dozen times before. We spent the next hour going over the details. Angela explained how a revocable trust could later be changed, but an irrevocable one would hold firm. I chose the latter. I didn't want to leave room for doubt. Not in Trevor's mind, not in mine. By the time I left the office, the sun had climbed high. It was warm, unseasonably so. I walked slowly to the bus stop, the air thick with dust and traffic. That night, I slept better than I had in months. No nightmares, no spinning thoughts, just sleep. In the morning, I made a real breakfast: eggs, toast, even jam. I played the radio and let myself hum along to the music. Not because I was happy, but because I was, for the first time, steady. It wasn't much, what I had left. A few thousand in savings, a tiny life insurance policy, the odds and ends in my apartment, things I could sell if needed. But it would be enough for her. For one good step into adulthood. I hadn't seen my granddaughter Lucy in over a year. Her mother had taken her to another state after the divorce. Trevor used to complain about the custody visits. Too expensive, he'd say. Too complicated. I used to nod and sympathize. Now I wasn't so sure. I still had Lucy's last drawing taped to my fridge, a crooked sun and a house with a red roof. It said, "Grandma's house," in big, shaky letters. I stared at it for a long time. She was the only one who had never asked me for anything. I mailed the papers that same afternoon. Angela said the trust would be active within a week, pending review. Once it was finalized, the money would be untouchable, protected. Finally. After all these years, I'd placed a boundary that couldn't be undone by guilt or a phone call. I didn't tell anyone. Not because it was a secret, but because there was no one left to tell. That Sunday, I walked to the park. The sky was overcast, the air dry and soft, the kind of winter day Arizona occasionally offers, like an apology for summer. I sat on a bench beneath a jacaranda tree, though it hadn't bloomed in months. A mother passed with a toddler in a red sweater, and I caught myself staring, watching her lean down and fix the child's shoe. The girl laughed, bright, full, effortless. I used to think Trevor laughed like that. Once when he was 7, he brought home a turtle from the ditch behind our house. "I'm going to keep him forever," he said, cradling the muddy shell in his palms. "He's mine." We named it Curtis. Curtis, the turtle. He lasted 2 days before Trevor forgot to put water in the box. I remember finding the poor thing in the sun, motionless. Trevor cried for hours, swearing he'd never forget anything again. Maybe that was the last time he cried. When I got home from the park, a letter was waiting for me. Not a bill, not an ad, a handwritten envelope. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. The return address was unfamiliar, a post office box in Oregon. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No greeting, no sign-off. Just 7 words written in Trevor's unmistakable angular handwriting. "Mom, can you call me? It's urgent." That was it. No apology, no explanation, not even a number. I sat down slowly at the table. My tea had gone cold. I reheated it anyway, even though the microwave buzzed too loud in the quiet apartment. I knew what was coming. I'd seen the pattern before. The silence. Then the crack. The moment he resurfaced with a need. He was never gone for nothing. He just waited until what I had left became valuable again. I thought about not responding, just tearing the note in half and throwing it away. But part of me, the old part, the mother part, still needed to hear his voice. I found the last number I had for him. It had been disconnected months ago. Of course it had. I stared at the envelope again. A post office box. Nothing more. So I wrote back. Just a postcard. I didn't bother with pleasantries. "Trevor, got your note. I no longer handle money matters directly. If this is about finances, contact my attorney, Angela Whitman, Legal Trust Administrator. Any further questions must go through her. If this is not about money, you know where I live." I walked it to the mailbox myself. It felt like drawing a line in permanent ink. 2 days later, the phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. "Mom?" His voice was soft, familiar, empty. "I got your card," he said. "I got your letter." Silence. Then, "I'm sorry I haven't called. Things have been rough." I didn't reply. Let him fill the space. I ran into some issues, some debts from the business, legal stuff. It's all complicated. I'm trying to fix it, but..." He paused, then tried again. "I'm in a really tight spot, Mom." "Of course you are." Still, I waited. "I just need a little help, not like before. Just enough to get over this hump, then I'm clear, I promise." Promises. Always promises. I don't manage my money anymore, Trevor, I said calmly. It's in a trust. For who? For Lucy? His breath caught. Wait, so it's locked up? Yes. But you still have control, right? I mean, you can. No, I interrupted. I can't, and I won't. Silence again. Then the shift. I could feel it through the phone. I'm your son, he said. I'm your only child. Yes, I replied. And I gave up everything for you once. I won't do it again. He muttered something under his breath, then a sharper tone. So that's it? That's it. He hung up. I placed the phone gently back on the table. Then I stood up, washed a dish, folded the dish towel, and exhaled. He had finally asked the question, and I had finally given the answer. I didn't hear from him after that. Not that day, not the next, not the week that followed. There was no second call, no follow-up note, no apology, just silence again. But this time, it felt different. Not cold, not cruel, just final. As if the door had shut on something I hadn't realized was still open. I thought I would feel regret or grief. But instead, what I felt was simpler, clearer. Relief. That night, I made soup from the pantry donations and added a little rosemary I'd grown in a cracked pot near the window. I lit a candle, not for any occasion, but because I wanted light that came from something I could control. I ate slowly, thoughtfully. The taste was plain, but clean, like something honest. After dinner, I walked around the apartment and took inventory. Not of things, I had so few of those left, but of peace. There were no voices raised, no footsteps pacing, no inbox filled with requests. There was just me, the hum of the fridge, and the faint wind outside. I opened one of the boxes I hadn't touched in a year. Inside were photo albums, the old kind, with the plastic sheets and sticky pages. Some of the pictures were faded now, the colors bleeding at the edges, but the moments were still there. James in the backyard with the lawnmower, Trevor with chocolate on his chin after his 5th birthday, me, pregnant and barefoot on the front steps, laughing at something James had said. I ran my hand over that one. We were poor then, tired too. But we were together. That used to mean something. I flipped further, stopping at a photo from Trevor's high school graduation. He was tall, lanky, holding his diploma in one hand and flashing that same smile he always used when he knew he had won something. I was standing next to him, beaming. My arm was around him. His was not around me. Funny what you notice in hindsight. Next to that photo was one of Lucy, age 5, holding a sparkler on the 4th of July. James had taken that one. You could see the blur of motion in her hand, the sparkles flying upward like she was casting spells. She was magic. Still is, I'd like to think. The next morning, I called the school where Lucy was enrolled. I had looked it up months ago, but never had the courage to call. A woman answered. I explained who I was, careful not to overshare. I'm her grandmother, I said. I live out of state. I was wondering if there's a way I could send something for her birthday. There was a pause. Then the woman softened. Of course. We have a mail drop. Would you like the address? I wrote it down carefully, then asked if Lucy had a favorite color or any hobbies. She loves horses, the woman said with a smile in her voice. And purple. Everything must be purple. I thanked her, hung up, and sat for a long time in front of the window. I couldn't undo what had been done. I couldn't change Trevor. I couldn't rewrite the years I'd spent trying to be enough. But I could love Lucy. I could protect what little I had left. I could leave something good behind. something untainted by guilt or shame or disappointment. The next day, I went to the store and bought a purple notebook, a box of glitter pens, and a small stuffed horse. I wrapped them in tissue paper and added a note. Dear Lucy, happy birthday, darling. I hope you always chase the things that make you feel alive. Love the horses. Love the sky. Love yourself. With all my heart, Grandma Annie. I mailed the box that afternoon. At the post office, the clerk smiled politely, asked if I wanted insurance. I said no. You can't insure hope. The package took 8 days to arrive. I checked the tracking number every morning, not because I doubted the system, but because I needed something to look forward to. Something that moved. On the 9th day, the phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. I hesitated, then picked up. Grandma? Her voice was small, breathless, like she'd been running. Hi, sweetheart, I said, steadying myself against the counter. Did you get the box? I did. It was purple. Everything was purple. The pens sparkle. She giggled. And the horse, I named him Maple. That's a good name, I said. Strong. There was a pause. Then, you remembered my birthday. Of course I did. I always will. Another pause. Mom said you moved far away. I swallowed. Not too far, just far enough to start again. She doesn't talk about you much. I know. She was quiet for a moment. Then she whispered, I miss you. That nearly broke me. I miss you too, Lucy. All the time. I'm going to write you with the glitter pens, okay? Please do. We talked for 10 more minutes. About school, about her reading contest, about a girl named Maddie who cheated at jump rope, but nobody said anything because Maddie's mom was on the PTA. Kid politics. I remembered those well. When she hung up, I sat down slowly, clutching the phone like it might vanish. It was the first time in years that someone had said they missed me and meant it. That night, I took out my journal. Not the red notebook of debts and losses. A different one. Blank. Still crisp. I began writing letters to Lucy. Real letters. Stories about her father as a boy. Stories about James. About our dog Molly and the time she stole a whole meatloaf off the counter. About the night we lost power and played cards by candlelight, laughing until the wax ran low. I wanted Lucy to know who she came from, not in the legal sense, not in the bloodline sense, but in the heartbeat sense. I mailed 1 letter each week, and she wrote back. Her handwriting was messy, full of hearts over the eyes and doodles in the margins. She told me about a dream where she rode Maple the horse to school. She asked if I believed in ghosts. She said she'd started hiding the letters under her mattress so her mom wouldn't throw them away. I cried after that one. Not because of sadness, but because of the quiet bravery in it. Lucy had inherited my spine, not my son's charm, not his slipperiness, my steadiness. One afternoon, weeks later, I got a letter with no hearts and no doodles, just straight words scrawled with anger. Dad said you're lying. He said you locked the money away because you don't love him anymore. Is that true? I didn't answer right away. I spent 2 days walking around the question, touching it with gloved fingers, trying to decide how much truth a child could carry. Then I sat down and wrote, Lucy, love isn't a faucet. It doesn't turn on and off based on what people give or take. I love your father. I always have. But sometimes, love alone isn't enough to protect us. Sometimes people use love like a ladder. They climb up, and when they've reached what they want, they forget who held the base steady. What I did with the money was to protect the future. Yours. Mine. Not out of revenge, out of wisdom. One day you'll understand. And when you do, I hope you forgive him and love him anyway. But don't ever let anyone, not even family, treat you like you owe them your silence. She didn't reply for almost 2 weeks. Then a postcard came, a purple one, with a sketch of a ladder drawn in glitter pen. Thanks for holding the bottom, Grandma. In early spring, a letter arrived from my bank. At first, I assumed it was another statement. I opened it with the usual resignation, already rehearsing the numbers in my head. But the paper inside was heavier than usual. Formal, official. It was a notification of inquiry. Trevor had tried to access the trust, not directly, he wasn't named anywhere in it, but through what they called a representative third-party request. Someone posing as an advisor. The bank flagged it. The trust was secure. No action had been taken, but they were required to inform me. I sat at the table, the letter spread before me, and stared at the words until they blurred. He hadn't even asked me. He had gone around me as if I were an obstacle instead of his mother, as if what I'd built, what I'd given, what I'd protected, belonged to him by right. I folded the letter, placed it neatly back into the envelope, and tucked it into the red notebook. I didn't call him. I didn't confront him. I didn't write another postcard. I'd said what I needed to say. Some truths don't need repetition. But that night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the shadows from the window crawling across the walls like slow water. My thoughts circled, not in anger, but in something colder, not quite grief, not quite fear. Something I hadn't let myself name before. Surrender. Not to him, to the truth. That Trevor was gone, even if he still had a pulse and a mailbox. That the boy I had held through fevers, who once cried over a dead turtle, no longer existed. That I had spent years mourning someone who was still alive. And that this mourning, quiet and invisible, was the loneliest kind of grief. And yet, even in that, there was power. Because mourning has an end. And mine was nearing. The next day, I cleaned the apartment. Really cleaned it. I opened every box, unwrapped every item. I held it, decided. Keep or release. No more halfway living. No more sitting between the past and the possible. I gave away clothes, dishes, even James's books, except for one, a battered gardening guide with his notes in the margins. That one stayed. I made room. And in that room, I found something I hadn't expected. Space to breathe. Lucy kept writing. Her letters were longer now, more thoughtful. She told me about a poetry contest she entered, even included her submission. It was about a horse with wings who couldn't fly because no one had told her she could. I think it's kind of about me, she wrote. I agreed. In one letter, she asked me if I had any dreams left. It was such a simple question, childish even. But it stopped me. Dreams? I hadn't thought in those terms in years. I'd spent so long making sure everyone else had what they needed. Trevor, James, even strangers with charities and causes and sad eyes, that I'd stopped dreaming for myself. But that night, I made tea, sat at the table, and wrote back. Lucy, when I was your age, I wanted to be a librarian. I liked the idea of giving people stories, of helping them find themselves in the pages of other lives. I never did become one. Life took me a different way. And that's okay. I built something else. But lately, I've been wondering, what if it's not too late to hold stories again? So thank you for your question. You reminded me I'm still allowed to dream. The next week, I went to the local library. Not to read, to ask. They weren't hiring, not exactly. But the young woman at the desk smiled when I asked about volunteering. "We always need help with the after-school program," she said. "The kids would love someone like you." Someone like me. I walked home lighter that day. Not young, not invincible, but seen. The library smelled the way I remembered childhood did. Paper and dust, floor polish and quiet. A good quiet, the kind you choose. Not the kind that's left behind when someone walks out and never comes back. My first shift was on a Tuesday. 4 kids, all under 10. 2 boys who couldn't sit still. 1 girl who didn't speak but kept rearranging the crayons in color order. And a boy named Isaiah who asked if I was as old as the Declaration of Independence. I laughed, loud and full, before I even realized I was laughing. It had been months since that sound left my mouth. We read a book about frogs that day. I made the voices. They howled with laughter when I made one of the frogs French. Afterward, Isaiah said, "You're funny. You should come every day." "I'll be back next Tuesday," I said, like clockwork. He frowned. "That's not soon." Still, when I left, he waved so hard his glasses fell off. I helped him put them back on. As I walked home, the spring light soft on the sidewalk, I thought about how much space one child's voice could fill. Not Trevor's, not anymore, but Lucy's, Isaiah's, the girl with the crayons. Children who didn't owe me anything, who saw me not for what I used to be, but for what I still could be. When I got home, there was a voicemail. From Carol. She never called during the day. "Annie, call me when you get this. It's about Trevor." My heart didn't race. My breath didn't catch. I just listened, then walked to the sink, washed my hands, and called her back. She answered on the first ring. He was arrested. The words landed like a stone in still water, not sharp, but heavy. I sat down. For what? Fraud, bank fraud, and something about stolen identities, I'm not sure. But it was on the news here. His face, Annie. I closed my eyes. Is he in jail? For now, yes. There'll be a hearing. Maybe more. Did he... I hesitated. Did he say anything about me? Carol paused. No, not that I saw. I thanked her, hung up, and sat still for a long time. So this was the end of the story he wrote for himself. Not glory, not success, but the quiet thud of consequences. I thought I would feel satisfaction, maybe even triumph. But what I felt instead was grief. Not the grief of betrayal, but the grief of recognition. He had chosen this, over and over, and now the world had chosen back. Later that night, I received a letter. No envelope, just a folded sheet left by my door as if someone had driven here themselves and slipped it through. I opened it carefully. Mom, you won. Congratulations. They took everything. The house, the car. I don't know how long I'll be inside or what happens after, but I figured you'd want to know. They asked about the trust, about you. I didn't say anything, so don't worry. Your secret's safe. I'm not that cruel, but I hope you're happy. I really do. There was no signature, but I didn't need one. I folded the letter, placed it in the red notebook with the others, then closed it for the last time. I had no desire to answer. Not because I hated him, not even because I blamed him, but because I finally understood. Some children grow into the kind of people who build, who carry, who remember, and some grow into people who take, who drain, who forget. And no amount of sacrifice changes that. I hadn't won, as he said, but I had survived. And that, too, is a kind of victory. After the letter, The world didn't change. The sky didn't darken. The ground didn't shake. No divine hand reached down to pat my shoulder or tell me I'd done the right thing. It was just another Thursday. I made toast, watered the rosemary, read the local paper, even though I already knew what it would say. There was a small article on page 7. Local man charged in multi-state fraud investigation. It didn't name me, didn't mention his family, just his company, his aliases, the approximate sum of the damages. It was a number I couldn't comprehend, high enough to bury a dozen lives. He hadn't just taken from me. He'd taken from strangers, investors, former employees, people who'd believed the way I once had, with both eyes shut, arms wide open. I reread the article 3 times. Not because I needed the facts. I just needed to believe it was real. The Trevor I raised, the boy who once cried over a turtle, who held my hand on his first day of school, who called me from college dorm rooms because he couldn't remember how long to boil rice. That boy had vanished long before this arrest. I just hadn't wanted to see it. Denial is a kindness we give ourselves when the truth costs too much. At the library that week, the children were louder than usual. One of the boys had a loose tooth and made everyone look at it. The girl with the crayons finally spoke. One word, purple, as she held up a drawing. Isaiah asked if I'd ever been on TV. Only in dreams, I said. He nodded solemnly. Me too. I stayed late after the session, wiping tables and sorting returned books. The librarian offered me a cup of tea, and we sat together in the break room. I saw your last name on the news, she said gently. I wasn't sure if it was related. I hesitated, then nodded. It was my son. She didn't ask anything more. She just sipped her tea and said, I'm sorry. And that was enough. No one else brought it up. Not Carol, not Lucy, though her next letter included a folded poem titled Things We Don't Say Out Loud, inside in pink glitter ink. Sometimes people fall down holes so deep they forget what the sun looked like. Sometimes people climb on others to get out. Sometimes they never say sorry. But sometimes we build ladders. And sometimes we become the sun. I wept for a long time after reading it. She was 11. 11. And she already knew more about truth than most adults I'd met. That Sunday, I returned to church for the first time in over a year. I wore the same dress I'd worn to James's memorial, simple, dark blue, modest. I sat in the third pew from the back and didn't sing. Just listened. Afterward, a woman approached me, someone I only vaguely remembered from choir. She took my hand and said, "You look stronger." I smiled, small and true. I feel cleaner, like a wound finally scabbed over. "You're not alone," she said, and for the first time in a very long time, I believed her. The next day, I received a letter from Trevor's lawyer. Not handwritten, not folded with regret. Typed, crisp, cold. A request. Trevor wanted to know if I would testify on his behalf. Character reference, maternal compassion, anything that might sway the court. There was a line in the letter that struck me hard. It would mean a great deal to your son if you were willing to support his effort toward rehabilitation. I stared at that phrase. Rehabilitation. As if the damage could be polished off. As if this was just a rough patch. I didn't reply. Instead, I mailed another letter to Lucy. Sweetheart, sometimes people ask us to do things that sound kind. But kindness without truth is only cowardice. I will not lie for your father. Not to a judge, not to the world, not to myself. But I will continue to be someone you can trust. someone whose word means something. And one day, when you're standing at a crossroads, I hope you'll choose the same." Her response arrived the following week. It was just one sentence: "I'm proud to come from you." Spring settled in fully, not with blossoms and green shoots, but with wind and dust, the kind of dry that gets into your teeth and settles in your bones. Still, I left the windows open. I liked the sound of the air moving. It reminded me that time kept going, even when we didn't. I hadn't spoken Trevor's name aloud in weeks. I had removed it, carefully, from conversation. I no longer explained who he was or where he'd gone. I didn't rehearse answers. I didn't prepare defenses. He simply faded, like the print on an old receipt. Something that once held value, now unreadable. Carol came by one afternoon with lemonade and cookies she didn't bake. We sat at my small table and watched the sky darken through the window. "Heard about the hearing," she said softly. I nodded. "It's scheduled for next month." "Do you think he'll go to prison?" "I think that's up to the court. And him." She studied me. "You're different now." "Better?" "Clearer." I sipped the lemonade. Too sweet. I didn't say so. That evening, I pulled out a box from the back of my closet. Not the red notebook. I hadn't opened that in weeks, but a wooden one James had made long ago. Inside were letters, real ones, from him, from the early years of our marriage, when he worked construction in the city and I stayed home with Trevor. His handwriting was strong, a little slanted. Always addressed the same. To my Annie. One of them read, "You're stronger than you know. I see it every time you get up after the world knocks you down. And one day, if life ever makes you question who you are, I hope you read this and remember, you were never small. Not even once." I folded it back carefully, then lit a candle and sat beside the window. Across town, somewhere in a cell or a holding facility, my son was likely doing the same thing, waiting. But the difference was this: I wasn't waiting for him anymore. I'd begun filling out the paperwork to update my will. Angela helped me. We sat across from each other at her office, the blinds half drawn to keep the afternoon sun off her desk. "I want everything to go to Lucy," I said. "The trust. Whatever's left of my accounts, the furniture, even the letters." Angela nodded. "You don't want to include Trevor?" "No." "No clause for reconciliation?" I smiled faintly. "He's already taken enough. If one day he finds his way back to goodness, that's between him and God, but not between him and my assets." She didn't push, just handed me a pen. And just like that, I wrote myself out of his reach. The next week, I got a package in the mail. Purple envelope, glitter tape sealing the sides. Inside, a notebook, covered in horse stickers, stars, and one shiny gold heart. The note inside read, "Dear Grandma, you said you wanted to hold stories again, so I made you a book to keep them in. I even left the first page blank, because the next story is yours, not Dad's, not mine. Yours. Love, Lucy." I held that notebook to my chest for a long time. Later that night, I opened it and wrote on the first page. I gave everything I had to save someone who didn't want saving, but in doing so, I found something I'd almost forgotten: myself. And now, I begin again. The court date arrived on a Monday. I didn't go. I'd thought about it, briefly, whether I should sit in the back, watch from the shadows, see with my own eyes the man my son had become. But in the end, I chose the garden behind the library instead. The city kept it simple: a few benches, native plants, stones warmed by the sun. I sat beneath a Palo Verde tree, its branches barely green, and read a book Lucy had sent me. A fantasy story, full of flying horses and girls who spoke to rivers. She said it reminded her of us. I read it twice. By noon, I knew the hearing was likely finished. My phone remained silent. No calls, no messages, no news alerts. I didn't look anything up. I didn't want to know until the world was ready to tell me. 2 days later, the librarian handed me a folded piece of newspaper. "Thought you might want to see this," she said quietly. I unfolded it slowly. Guilty verdict in fraud trial. Local entrepreneur faces minimum 5-year sentence. There was a photo, grainy and poorly lit, of Trevor in a gray suit. His face thinner than I remembered, his jaw set in that stubborn way he used to have when he refused to apologize as a boy. No mention of family. No mother quoted. No character witnesses. He had stood alone, and the court had answered accordingly. I folded the paper and placed it in my bag. Not out of sentimentality, but out of respect for the truth. It deserved to be held, even now. That evening, I called Lucy. "Hi, Grandma," she said, chipper. "Guess what? I won the poetry contest. They're printing my poem in the school paper and everything." "That's wonderful," I said, my throat tightening. "I'm so proud of you." There was a pause. Then quietly, "Is Dad going away?" "Yes." "For how long?" "At least 5 years." Another pause. "Is it okay that I'm not crying?" "It's more than okay." She sniffled. "I feel bad for not feeling bad." "You're allowed to feel what's real. That's not wrong, Lucy. That's honest." I don't miss him the way I thought I would." I closed my eyes. That makes sense. He always said he'd come to my dance recital, but he never did. I let the silence sit gently between us. Then I said, "I'll come to the next one, if you'd like." "Yes, please." She told me all about the dance. A group number, glittery costumes, something about jazz hands and falling leaves. I took notes. I planned a trip. I promised I'd be there. Front row. When we hung up, I didn't cry. I didn't mourn. Instead, I began packing. Not because I was moving again, no. I had begun putting together a memory box for Lucy. Inside it, I placed James's gardening book, still full of his scribbles. A photo of our old house, taken one spring when the lilac bushes bloomed. The drawing she'd made years ago of Grandma's house with the red roof. My wedding ring, not for value, but for truth. The red notebook, sealed with a ribbon, its final page blank. And at the very bottom, I tucked a short letter. "Lucy, when you are older, when you've lived and lost and begun again, open this. Not before. Not because I'm gone, but because you've arrived." Inside is everything I chose to carry and everything I finally chose to put down. May you carry only what's worth your strength. Love always, Grandma Annie. Summer arrived with more wind than heat, unusual, but not unwelcome. I liked the way it moved through the trees outside my window, how it carried things off the porch I never meant to keep. Sometimes, I think that's what grace really is. The quiet removal of what no longer serves us. I went to Lucy's recital in early June. Carol drove me, she insisted. Said I shouldn't be taking the bus in the heat, not at my age. I let her fuss over my shoes and straighten my cardigan like we were 20 again. It felt good to be cared for, even just a little. The auditorium was small, but bright. Parents in folding chairs. Kids with nervous hands and glitter in their hair. When Lucy walked onto the stage in her silver leotard and purple sash, My heart did something I didn't expect. It steadied, not raced, not swelled, steadied. She spotted me in the front row, smiled wide, and waved once before the music started. The dance was simple, but she knew every step. Her arms didn't flail. Her feet landed where they should. And in one moment, halfway through the routine, she paused, turned, and looked out at the crowd like she knew exactly who she was. It wasn't pride I felt. It was knowing she would be okay. Afterward, we sat on the curb with juice boxes and cupcakes, and she leaned her head on my shoulder. "Did I do okay?" she asked. "You did better than okay." She smiled. "I'm glad you came." "I'll always come," I said. And for once, I knew I could keep that promise. That night, back in my apartment, I unpacked the dress I wore to the recital and hung it carefully in the closet. I opened the windows to let in the night air. I brewed a cup of chamomile tea, and I let myself breathe. I no longer checked the mailbox with hope. I no longer tracked the news for court updates. Trevor's sentencing had passed quietly. 5 years. No parole for at least 3. I didn't attend. I didn't write. Neither did he. The silence now felt earned. Angela finalized the last of the paperwork that week. The will, the trust. All clean, all airtight. Lucy would have enough for college, for rent, for a start. And that's all a life really needs. One good, safe start. I donated the last of the boxes, gave away the furniture I didn't use, kept only what was necessary. The teapot, the radio, the notebook Lucy made me, now half filled with my handwriting. On the last page I wrote, "I was not the villain. I was not the victim. I was the wall that held when no one else would." And then I closed it. The library asked if I wanted to lead story time twice a week. I said yes. The kids started calling me Miss Annie, and I didn't correct them. I liked the way it sounded, like a person still becoming something, not just someone who had already been. Carol and I started having dinner together every Friday. We take turns cooking. Her lasagna is better, but I make a mean apple crumble. Some nights, I sit on the porch with my tea and watch the world go dim. Not with sadness, not with loneliness, just stillness. And every so often, I receive a letter from Lucy. Her handwriting's getting neater. Her voice stronger. She ends each one the same way. Still building my ladder. Still becoming the sun. I smile every time. If you've made it this far, thank you. Not just for reading, but for listening, for staying. And if this story moved something in you, if it reminded you of what you've given, or what you've lost, or what you're still fighting to protect, I ask just one thing. Share it. Leave a comment. Tell someone. Because stories like this aren't rare. They're just rarely spoken aloud. And maybe, just maybe, there's another woman out there, sitting in a too small room with a too quiet phone, who needs to hear that she is not alone, not forgotten, not small, just quiet, but strong, always strong.